Very occasionally people do a shout out on a Facebook group saying, look, I need help, I don't know what I'm looking at, can somebody help me? And the garage in this case doesn't really know what they're looking at, or at least I think they don't. This is a problem with a CVT registered 45, and the owner has contacted the group asking for help, and it so happens that the car is very local to me, so I'm able to come out and see what the problem is. And this might be an interesting episode for those of you who have got a CVT gearbox Rover 45, because mine works perfectly fine, touch wood at the moment. But what does one sound like when they're not fine? And here we have, forgive the sunlight here guys, we have an 03 registered Rover 45. We're in daily use. It's had a few knocks here and there. It's got the lovely serpent wheels, and it has a complete, I shall show you now, leather interior with the beige carpets and half beige two-tone dashboard, which I think is a really nice touch on these early cars. It is in daily use, and the owner's having some problems with the gearbox. And I know what some of you are going to say, oh, it's the CVT's playing up again. Yeah, in this case it is playing up, but there's a very good reason for this video. And you know, as I've said to you before, mine works perfectly fine, but there are many of them that have niggles and little issues here and there. Now I am going to take you on a bit of a drive just in a few minutes, just to demonstrate what the problem is. Now the owner said that there was a bit of an issue with the revs rising up and down. The gearbox seems to almost jump between ratios, it seems. And this gearbox should not do that. It should be very nice and smooth and very linear, but the revs kind of jump all over the place. And this started last week. She took it to the garage, who kind of identified that it may be a gearbox fault, and what they kind of suggested was a few things. Now apparently they put extra oil in the car. Now the owner, not knowing a great deal about the gearbox, assumed that when they mentioned oil they meant, she thought, engine oil. I think what's happened here is they may have put oil, or at least the incorrect fluid, in this gearbox, because this car was in the garage for 2 days. This is CVT fluid, is a specialist fluid, and there's no way that they would have had this stuff sitting on the shelf. The only places that I know that have this stuff on the shelf are Rover specialist garages, and this garage is certainly not one of them. So we've got an issue where potentially we've got standard automatic transmission fluid within the car itself. Right, underneath the bonnet we have the familiar sight of a 1.8 litre K series. Obviously it's an earlier model, being the pre-facelift model, so the earlier headlights, the earlier look that most people kind of prefer, but it's kind of very familiar to you guys under the bonnet. And I like to say mine was actually probably a little bit worse than this in some respects. I think most 45s generally look like this under the bonnet, and it has the usual rocker cover leaks that mine had before. But anyway, let's not get distracted. We're here for the gearbox, and there's a few things that immediately I'm a bit alarmed about. Firstly, this dipstick, which typically they all break. This one has detonated, which makes it a bit difficult to read the correct level when the car is hot. But the most alarming thing, and I'm just going to show you this before I even start, that is not good. That is CVT fluid. I can smell it, and it smells like the fluid. So it has got the correct fluid in the gearbox, but I don't know how much, and the fact that it's dark coloured means something has gone on. I think this hasn't been changed, and it's possible it may have gone on a little bit too long in terms of the gearbox. I don't want to rule anything out, but the best way of describing the problems of this gearbox before I proceed is to take you down the road. Okay, right, okay, so we're getting, and we've got this familiar setup down here. That that seems to fit a lot nicer than my car. It seems to fit nicer in the dashboard. But we have the Lucas fob, which is quite familiar. Just press a button. Just going to turn that off before I get done for copyright. Now, this is the sound coming from the gearbox. Yeah, I think there are some people saying that I shouldn't really drive this, but the only way of showing you exactly what the problem is by driving it. So I'm going to set you up in the headrest and we'll go from there. Hello, skeleton. Right, I'm going to open the window, which is a bit juddery because they probably need a bit of greasing, but hey. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go down the road and see how it is. I've just put it in reverse. The gearbox responds. And that's interesting, it's actually stalled on me. That can happen when you're going to drive for the first time if the engine is cold, by the way. That is a classic sign of the gearbox behaving as it probably normally does up from cold. But we've got it into drive, and I can't show you the actual RPM gauge, but we're just going to take it for a little spin. And already we've got these sounds all over the place. Now I'm going to shut up and you listen to this. Oh gosh, it shouldn't be doing that. Nope, that is not good whatsoever. The revs are all over the blooming place. If you heard that, it basically it almost changed up a gear like a normal automatic gearbox. It shouldn't be doing that. It should be really smooth. It's gone into gear now, and there's no, warning lights or anything on the dashboard. But now we're going to go again. No, don't think this is a particularly happy gearbox. It drives, but it's not good. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try the test of putting it into sport mode to see whether that has any effect on the sound of, potentially, and I know there are people who are going to say this, is it the bearing? Is it that bearing? Now, if you've got bearing issues, it shouldn't make a sound in neutral or park. Listen to it now. I think we might have bearing issues with this gearbox. Okie dokie, let's pop right in. I've got a feeling that that is potentially a bearing problem. Okay, so as you guys could hear, and most probably have come to the conclusion that we may have a bearing problem in this car. Now, the problem with this gearbox is the primary bearing is a known fault. It can be changed. It is a simple case of getting the side plate off the gearbox and then using a puller to pull the bearing off. It's a bit more complicated than that, but owners have done this for about £20 for a bearing, which you can still get. It's the one they use on the mini gearboxes, and use a correct puller to pull it off. A couple of hours labour if you're paying somebody, but we're not quite sure about that. And at the moment, this car cannot be driven as it is, so the owner has given me the go ahead to drain, take the pan off the car, and to see what fluid we've got, to get the oil out and to assess what is in that drain pan, because I'd like to know if we've got shards or anything, or the belt might be breaking up, to assess whether this is just basically a scrap gearbox, and essentially that kind of scraps the car. I know some people are going to laugh when I say that, but you can get another one quite cheaply, and it's everything I believe in, but it's a simple truth. Getting one of these gearboxes is quite difficult as it is, and then having it fitted to the car, it's a lot of time and hassle, and for that cost it'd be better for the owner to get another car, basically, and that's the end of it. But what I'm going to do in this episode is go through the motions of draining the pan again to see where we go. I'm going to keep this short and brief because you've seen me do this before, but let's go from there. Okay, right, this hopefully might be a bit less messy than when I attempted my job. Getting these bolts up here was quite tight. The bolts are all kind of down there, and my my Amtech spanner has come in use today with its multi-spline socket. I've never used that before. It was in the boot of my car. I didn't intend to actually come here to take oil out of the gearbox, but needs must. I need to see what's in there. And if your gearbox oil looks like, well, if your CVT oil looks like engine oil, you need to change it before something goes wrong, like potentially this car, which we're going to find out. I am going to show you guys exactly what I have discovered. We have the hedgehog. Now, if you look back at my old video when I dropped my pan, it was less than this, but it's quite nice, isn't it? It's quite nice actually on the magnet. They always look like that, hedgehogs. Now, the filter looks a little bit dirty on the inside. It's going to need a bit of a clean out, and I'm going to give that a clean in a second. But most importantly, there's nothing in the pan. There's absolutely nothing. There's no, apart from grass, there's no shards of metal, nothing to suggest that the belt is starting to shred. I've seen that on a few members' car where the belt starts shredding, and then you get all this swarf, massive amounts of swarf in the pan. There's nothing. And if I just take this one here, I've just cleaned that out, and it looks dirty in places, which I'm going to clean out, but there's nothing. There's absolutely no sign of swarf, nothing. So for me, this is potentially a good gearbox. What we're going to do is we're going to take, based on what I've seen there, we're going to put new fluid in the gearbox. Cut short to another week. We're going to put new fluid in, and it's going to be done as well as I can, despite the fact that the dipstick is slightly broken. I may actually use the dipstick off my car in order to get a correct reading, because that dipstick is possibly not going to give us the right reading. But that's what we're going to do. That filter is going to be cleaned out. We're going to clean all this out and do it properly. The gearbox is continuing to drip. We want to get as much of that stuff out as possible. And if I take you round here, and I'm going to show you one thing that has really caught me by surprise, really, and it's something that I didn't really notice before. But if I put the ignition on, look at that mileage. That is high mileage for this gearbox. In fact, I think it beats your car, Martin. So this is quite high mileage gearbox, and that possibly changes things. But the truth is, for a high mileage gearbox, that's actually to be expected if the oil has not been changed, which more or less I think means there's more chance it may have caused damage. The more miles it's been driven on that, the more chance that there might be some internal damage, but I can't see any. So the fact that the belt has not started falling apart suggests that things are okay. It could be a bearing problem. The truth is, if there is a bearing problem, it can be fixed. There are a couple of garages that, if it is the bearing making this noise, if we are still getting noises after all the fresh fluid has been put in and it's been driven, then we know where to go. And contrary to popular opinion, you do not need to drop the oil in order to change the bearing. It is simply you're taking the side plate off. You're obviously moving the oil pump out the way. There is a specific way of doing that. And there's a few gearbox specialists that know how to do this. I have not attempted it on my own car, which is why I'm not confident enough to tackle it on somebody else's car, because at the end of the day, if I make a mistake, then it's not my car that's stranded for ages. And this has been a daily workhorse for this family for quite a few years, so I'm kind of conscious of it needs to be done by somebody who knows what they're doing and do it first time, and there'll be paperwork for it, so the owner has got paperwork to show for it. So I think that's quite important to just say, but I can do this because I've done this, and loads of people can do this. You can do this at home. So I am going to leave this here because this gearbox is going to be drained of every single bit of oil going. There's only a couple of areas that I'm going to clean, and that is down there where you have the connection to the stepper motor. As I said, I've shown you in one of my videos how to do that. It is a simple case of twisting the connector off, squirting contact cleaner in, put the connector back on. Same with the starter inhibitor switch at the back of the gearbox. Clean that connection, okay? There is also a connection somewhere around here, I can't remember which one it was, for the speed sensor. Again, clean that. It's in that video. It's all in that video. And I'm going to repeat the same on this car because we might as well and do it properly. So it kind of eliminates the possibility that there is an electronic issue. I don't think so though, because the telltale sign, and I'll actually show you this now, is if we go in the car, and if you think you've got an electronic problem with the ECU, the best way of doing it is switch on the ignition. Okay, now we've got an indicator for what gear we're in. So if I just move the quadrant, reverse, neutral, drive, sport, there you go. And can we get some individuals? Yep, 1, 2, there you go. Won't let you go beyond 2, safety feature. Drive, neutral, reverse, park. There you go. If you've got a gearbox ECU issue where there's a bit of maybe water, it's a common fault that the water goes into the gearbox ECU, which is down there in the corner. You have to take the carpets out. But I'm pretty sure that that is not the issue, because otherwise there will be issues here. Start inhibitor switch problems might cause that to not read correctly. So that's all good. And I am now going to leave this episode here and come back when I next come back. What a nice viewpoint this is. I actually haven't been to this part of Birmingham in a while, and I've forgotten about the beautiful sights of a very, very nice Bartley Green reservoir, which, if any of you are local, you will know where I am. But Beatrix is running very good, and I'm quite relieved that this car has a good gearbox, because 113,000 miles is what the mileage of that Rover 45 has done, and that is a lot. I've got to say, I didn't put this in the video, and I thought I wanted to put it in now before we switch to the next part of this episode. That car has done 113,000 miles. I couldn't believe it. That fluid, if that's the original, the gearbox may have been on that fluid quite a long time more than what needed to be, and I suspect that might be the issue here. But it's possible, and this is something that I discovered when I took off all those sump bolts. They were very loose. Those sump gasket bolts were not even tight. They didn't need cracking off, which suggests to me that the gearbox sump pan may have been off before. And to have completed 113,000 miles, there is a high chance that it may have had a change before. Certainly the owners who've had it a few years do not recall any gearbox fluid oil change. So it's not been done in the last few years at least, but that fluid, even though it smelt relatively okay, it smelt a bit, not burnt, but not what it should be, a bit like the farm. The fluid in this smelt the same. It had lost its colour, and I do hope that this gearbox hasn't quite gone in the way that, well, I hope it hasn't, because otherwise that's a potential gearbox replacement. But the truth is, there's no shards, there's no nothing, but it might be the primary bearing. I am not certain of what noise they actually make. I was aware that, you know, when bearings go in gearboxes, they make groaning sounds. That didn't sound to me like it was a groaning sound. But I'm pretty sure at the end of this video we will find out if irreparable damage has been done to that gearbox. I have a slight feeling that there may have been, but we don't know for sure. So we're going to put new fluid in, £45 worth of the correct fluid, the same fluid I've used in this, put it in the gearbox and see what results that brings, if it brings in any results. If it drives better, if the gearbox actually drives better but we still have the sound, then the gearbox is fine, apart from, I suspect, would be a bearing. It's all hypothetical. Anyway, I shouldn't get hypothetical because I need to go home. Drives. I just love how smooth the take up is. I mean, if I just slow down a bit and accelerate, that's just oozing through all the millions of different ratios that you can get on this box. Absolutely love this gearbox. Anybody says any differently, you really do need to try one. You need to try a good one like one of these. I absolutely encourage people to grab one of these while you can, because these are rare with this gearbox. There's only 1,000 MG Rover vehicles with this gearbox, and it is something to be treasured. And I think I've got a good one. I definitely think I've got a good one, but hey. Now this is a hill. Now I'm going to put my foot down. That's 3,000 RPM, and we got to 40 at last. That wasn't particularly good, I have to say. I was expecting better, but then again, 3,000 RPM going up a hill is actually, it's nothing, isn't it? I could have put that, I didn't even put it in sport mode. That is just in normal mode. What I do want to say is my assessment of the manual gearbox. Now, I've done this before, but I'm going to do it again. I'm going to put it into manual mode. So we're going to sport, and then we're going to go to third, fourth. Right, we're in fourth now. Now we're going to go down a hill. Now, the problem with manual mode, and this is something that I've concurred with a few owners, is I'm going to downshift to third now. No, go to fourth. Maybe stick it in fourth. I'm going to now put it into drive, and there's a very good reason for that. There you go, and it settles back down. The problem is, if it's in manual mode, you're in selected gears, and I understand that this is probably not the sort of driving to do this. It's probably for the twisty A and B roads to get that more sporty feel. I definitely think the manual mode and the sport mode was definitely a thing they wanted to market on the MGF TF, and they just added it to the other the 25 and the 45 because, well, why not? And the rare versions of the Rover Streetwise CVT, which there are only a few examples left. But the truth is, I think it was a marketing gimmick, and I don't think it really works in practice. And the idea of a CVT is that you're in the correct gear at all times, and that you can actually enjoy that element. That is the truth of this gearbox. And if you're not in CVT mode, you're not in the correct ratio, and the performance really suffers in manual mode. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily more engaging in the non-MGF TF models like this, for instance, because you don't have the flappy panels. And if you haven't got the flappy panels, I don't really see the point in the manual mode, and I think the sport mode is just very silly, and I don't necessarily think it achieves too much. So that's my honest assessment of this gearbox.